The sun hung low over the Colorado Territory, painting the Badlands in shades of amber and rust. Luke Rawlins stood at the edge of his property line, watching the last of his cattle drift toward the water trough. At 32, he'd grown accustomed to the silence that wrapped around his small ranch like a worn blanket. The wind carried dust and the scent of sage, the only conversation he'd had in days. His hands, calloused from years of rope work and fence mending, rested on the weathered post as he surveyed his domain. It wasn't much. 40 head of cattle, a modest cabin built from local timber, and a well that ran dry every August. But it was his. The isolation suited him fine. Townfolk had long since stopped expecting him at Sunday services or Saturday barn dances. 20 miles east, his brother Eli lived a different life entirely, where Luke was granite. Eli was quicksilver, always laughing, always moving, always surrounded by the warmth of family. His wife, Clara, barely 23, had given him 3 children in 5 years: Thomas, age 7, Sarah, 5, and little Benjamin, who just turned 3. Eli ran a small freight business between Denver and the mining camps, enough to keep food on the table and his family in the respectable part of town. The brothers saw each other monthly, when Luke would ride in for supplies. Their conversations were brief but cordial, weighted by an understanding that some wounds between siblings never fully healed. Luke had chosen his path after their parents died, selling his share of the family land to Eli and retreating to the harsh comfort of solitude. On this particular October morning, Luke noticed dust rising from the eastern trail. Too much for a single rider, too little for a wagon train. He squinted against the morning glare, hand instinctively moving to the Winchester propped against the fence. But as the riders drew closer, he recognized the spotted mare that belonged to Samuel Morrison, Eli's business partner. Morrison's face told the story before his words could. The man's usual merchant smile was absent, replaced by the grim set of jaw that accompanied death's messenger. Behind him rode 2 other men from town, their hats pulled low. Luke. Morrison dismounted heavily, dust rising from his coat. "There's been an accident." The words hung in the air like smoke. Luke's throat constricted, but he remained still, waiting. Eli was searching for strays up in Devil's Canyon. His horse. Morrison paused, swallowing hard. Must have spooked at something. They found him at the bottom of the ravine. His neck was broke. The Winchester slipped from Luke's grasp, clattering against the fence post. The world seemed to tilt slightly, as if the earth itself had shifted beneath his boots. Eli, perpetually laughing. Eternally optimistic Eli, reduced to past tense in a single sentence. "When?" Luke's voice came out rougher than intended. "Yesterday evening. We've been riding since dawn to fetch you." Luke moved mechanically, saddling his horse with practiced efficiency while his mind reeled. The ride to town passed in a blur of dust and disjointed thoughts. He remembered teaching Eli to ride on their father's old gray. Remembered the fight that drove them apart. Harsh words over a woman who'd eventually married neither of them. Remembered the tentative peace they'd built these past years, careful as new ice on a pond. The Morrison house sat on the respectable end of Main Street, its white picket fence a stark contrast to the gathering crowd of mourners. Luke dismounted, his spurs ringing hollow on the wooden sidewalk. Inside, the parlor had been cleared for the pine coffin. Clara sat beside it, her dark hair unpinned and falling around her shoulders like a mourning veil. The children clustered around her, Thomas trying to be brave, Sarah crying silently, Benjamin too young to understand why his mother's lap had become a place of sorrow instead of stories. Luke removed his hat, standing awkwardly in the doorway. He'd spoken perhaps a dozen words to Clara in all the years she'd been married to his brother. She was a town girl, educated back east, with delicate hands meant for needlework. Not ranch life, beautiful in that fragile way that made rough men lower their voices and mind their language. "Luke." Her voice was barely a whisper. She looked up, and he saw devastation written in the purple shadows beneath her eyes. He crossed to the coffin, looking down at his brother's face. The mortician had done his work well, But death had stolen the animation that made Eli who he was. This still form was just an echo, a shell abandoned by its occupant. "He was alive when they found him," Clara continued, her voice catching. "For a few minutes, long enough to—" She pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, shoulders shaking. Luke waited, patient as he'd wait for a spooked colt to calm. He said your name, over and over, and then he grabbed Samuel's hand so tight they couldn't break his grip. His last words were, "Take care of my children. Please, tell Luke." The room seemed to compress around him. Luke gripped the edge of the coffin, knuckles white. Those 5 words, "Take care of my children," landed with the weight of shackles. Eli, even in death, binding him to the life Luke had spent years avoiding. "Mrs. Rollins." Mayor Henderson appeared at Luke's shoulder, voice pitched low with practiced sympathy. "About the arrangements." "There aren't funds for arrangements," Clara said flatly. "The business has debts. The bank holds paper on the house. I've nothing but the clothes we stand in." Whispers rippled through the gathered townspeople. Luke caught fragments. Poor little ones. What's to become of them? Surely her people back east, the cruel arithmetic of small-town charity. "They'll come to my place," Luke heard himself say. The words seemed to surprise him as much as anyone. "Until things are settled." Clara looked up sharply. "We couldn't impose." "It's not imposing." Luke's voice cut through her protest. "Eli asked me to care for them. I'll honor that." The funeral passed in a haze of hymns and handshakes. Reverend Philip spoke of resurrection and eternal rest, but Luke heard only the echo of his brother's last words. As they lowered the pine box into the ground, he noticed how small Clara looked, flanked by her children. The wind whipped at her black dress, borrowed, he realized, from one of the town matrons, after the burial. Luke helped Clara gather their meager belongings from the house that would soon belong to the bank. A trunk of clothes, some toys, Eli's rifle, a Bible with pressed flowers between its pages. The life of a family reduced to what would fit in a wagon bed. As they prepared to leave town, Luke caught the sharp glances and knowing looks. "Mrs." Watson whispered behind her fan to Mrs. Campbell. Men stepped out of the saloon to watch their departure, speculation clear in their eyes. A widow, 3 children, and a bachelor brother-in-law. The mathematics of scandal were simple in a town starved for gossip. Luke set his jaw and clicked the horses into motion. Let them talk. He had a promise to keep. The journey to his ranch stretched long with awkward silence. Sarah and Benjamin slept against their mother, but Thomas sat upright, eyes fixed on the unfamiliar landscape. The boy had his father's stubborn chin but his mother's thoughtful eyes. "Uncle Luke," Thomas's voice was small. "Will we live with you forever now?" Luke glanced back at the boy, then at Clara, who kept her gaze fixed on the horizon. Forever was a word he'd spent years avoiding, building his life in day-to-day increments. But looking at his nephew's earnest face, he couldn't voice that truth. "Long as you need," he said finally. As his ranch came into view, small, rough, but solid, Luke felt the weight of his new responsibility settle across his shoulders like a yoke. Behind him, Clara drew a sharp breath. He knew what she saw, isolation made manifest, a place where town comforts were just memory. "It's not much," he said, not turning around. "But it's shelter. It's more than we have claim to." Clara replied quietly, "We're grateful. Grateful." The words sat uneasily between them as Luke helped her down from the wagon. Their hands touched briefly, hers soft despite her trials, his rough as bark. Both pulled away quickly, the contact burning like a brand. As Luke carried sleeping Benjamin into the cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that Eli's death had set something in motion beyond his understanding. The empty spaces in his life, so carefully cultivated, were about to be filled with voices, needs, and complications he'd never wanted. But a promise was a promise, and in the fading light of that October day, with Clara shepherding her children into his home, Luke Rollins began to understand that some promises reshape a life entirely, whether a man is ready or not. The first week tested them all. Luke's cabin, built for one man's sparse needs, groaned under the weight of 4 additional souls. His single bed went to Clara and little Benjamin, while Sarah slept on a makeshift pallet near the stove. Thomas insisted on bedding down in the barn with Luke, declaring himself old enough to help with the men's work. Dawn came with Benjamin's fevered cries. The boy burned hot as a branding iron, his small body racked with chills. Clara, already worn thin by grief, moved between the bed and the stove in a desperate dance, boiling water for compresses that cooled too quickly in the autumn air. "The well's running low," Luke announced after his 3rd trip for water. "Haven't had rain in 6 weeks. Clara's hands stilled on the washcloth. "How low?" "Maybe 2 days' worth, if we're careful." He watched her shoulders sag. Another weight added to an already unbearable load. In town, water came from pumps and cisterns, always available. Out here, everything was scarce, rationed, fought for. That afternoon, while Clara tended Benjamin, wolves came for the chickens. Luke heard the commotion from the far pasture, squawking, snarling, Sarah's terrified screams. He rode hard, rifle ready, but arrived to find feathers and blood painting the dirt. 3 hens gone, the survivors huddled traumatized in the corner of their damaged coop. Sarah stood frozen, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "They came so fast," she whispered. "I tried to chase them with the broom, but—" "Wolves don't care about brooms," Luke said gently, surveying the damage. Another problem requiring supplies he didn't have, time he couldn't spare. "You did right to stay back. Could have been you they took instead." That night, dinner was a meager affair. Beans and the last of the salt pork, stretched thin across 5 plates. Clara barely touched hers, spooning most onto her children's plates when she thought Luke wasn't looking. He pretended not to notice, just as he pretended not to see how her dress hung looser each day, how her hands shook when she thought herself unobserved. The summer heat lingered despite October's arrival, turning the cabin into an oven by midday. On the 4th night, with Benjamin's fever finally broken but the air still stifling, Luke found himself unable to sleep. He stepped onto the porch, hoping for a breeze that wouldn't come. Clara sat on the steps, a shadow among shadows. "I couldn't sleep either," she said without turning. "The heat." Luke settled beside her, careful to leave a proper distance between them. The night sky stretched endless above, stars like scattered flour on a black tablecloth. "In Boston," Clara said softly. "We had ice delivered in summer. Seems like a dream now." "You're from Boston originally." "My father taught at the seminary there. He died when I was 16. Mother followed 2 years later." She pulled her shawl tighter despite the heat. "I came west to teach school, met Eli my first week in town. He was delivering supplies to the schoolhouse, and he made me laugh." Her voice trailed off. Luke remained silent, letting her words settle like dust. He understood the weight of memories, how they could comfort and cut in equal measure. "I don't know how to do this," Clara admitted suddenly. "The chickens, the well, everything in town. I managed. I could stretch Eli's earnings, make do, but here, you'll learn," Luke said simply. "Everyone does, or they don't survive." "Is that meant to be comforting?" "It's meant to be true." She turned to study his profile in the darkness. "You chose this life. The isolation. Chose might be too strong a word." "Then why?" Luke considered his answer. "After our parents died, Eli wanted to sell the old place, start fresh. I wanted to hold on, preserve what they'd built. We fought, said things brothers shouldn't say. When the dust settled, seemed better to put distance between us. But you reconciled. We learned to be cordial. There's a difference." Clara absorbed this, then asked quietly, "Do you regret it? The distance?" Before Luke could answer, a sound from the barn made them both turn. He was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the rifle that was never far from reach. But it was only Thomas, stumbling sleepy-eyed into the moonlight. Mama? The boy rubbed his eyes. Uncle Luke, I had a dream about Papa. He was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear him. Clara opened her arms, and Thomas folded into them. Too old for such comfort, but too young to refuse it. Luke watched them, mother and son clinging to each other in the vast darkness, and felt something shift in his chest, uncomfortable as a broken rib. The next morning brought new challenges. Luke found wolf tracks circling the cattle pen. Too many for comfort. The fence needed reinforcing, but that meant a trip to town for wire and posts, supplies he couldn't afford and time he didn't have. He was contemplating this problem when Clara appeared at the barn door, Benjamin on her hip. I want to help, she announced. You are helping, keeping house, tending the children. That's not enough. Her chin lifted in a gesture he was beginning to recognize. Show me what needs doing. I can learn. Against his better judgment, Luke began teaching her the small tasks, gathering eggs from the traumatized survivors, feeding the horses, checking fence lines for breaks. Her soft hands blistered quickly, but she never complained, wrapping them in torn petticoat strips and continuing on. One afternoon, while Luke worked on reinforcing the chicken coop, he heard laughter, actual laughter, from the garden plot. Clara had given the children buckets and sent them to gather stones from the field, turning the chore into a game. Even Thomas, so serious since his father's death, was smiling as he competed with Sarah to fill his bucket fastest. The sound stopped Luke mid-hammer swing. When was the last time laughter had echoed across his land? He couldn't remember. That evening, as Clara prepared their simple meal, she swayed on her feet. Luke caught her elbow, steadying her. When did you last eat a full meal? He asked bluntly. I'm fine. That wasn't the question. Her eyes flashed. The children need a mother who doesn't faint from hunger. He guided her to a chair, ignoring her protests. You're no good to them starved. He prepared the meal himself that night, pointedly filling her plate first and fullest. When she tried to share with Benjamin, Luke simply added more to the boy's own plate. Eat, he commanded. Later, after the children were abed. They shared the last of the coffee by the dying fire. The silence between them had shifted from awkward to something else. Not comfortable, exactly, but familiar. Thank you, Clara said quietly. For the food, for everything. Luke stared into the fire. Eli would have done the same for mine if positions were reversed. Would he? Clara's voice held an odd note. You didn't have a wife and children for him to shelter. The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither dared examine. Luke stood abruptly, collecting the empty cups. Storm's coming, he said, though the sky had been clear all day. Better check the animals. He fled to the barn, but even there he couldn't escape the image of Clara by firelight, her face soft with exhaustion and something else, something that reminded him he was a man who'd chosen loneliness, not a monk who'd embraced it. When he finally returned to the cabin, Clara had retired, but on the table sat a cup of fresh coffee, still warm, and beside it a small bundle, his torn shirt from the previous week, neatly mended with precise stitches. Luke fingered the repair, noting how carefully she'd matched the fabric, how small and even the stitches were. Town women's work, maybe, but placed here in his rough cabin like a promise of civilizing influence. Outside, actual storm clouds had begun gathering, drawn by his earlier lie. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Luke found himself hoping for rain to fill the well, for lightning to reset the charged air between them, for any kind of change that might ease the growing tension of two adults circling each other like wary animals while trying to build something resembling a family from the scattered pieces of tragedy. The first drops began to fall as he climbed into his bedroll in the barn. Through the gaps in the boards, he could see the cabin window where candlelight still flickered. Clara was awake too, probably mending more clothes or writing in the small journal he'd seen her hide beneath her pillow. Two strangers bound by a dying man's words, trying to navigate the treacherous ground between duty and something unnamed. Luke pulled his blanket higher and tried not to think about how her hair looked in candlelight, or how her rare smiles transformed her face from merely beautiful to something that made his chest ache. The storm broke in earnest then, washing the dust from the air and filling the wells. But it couldn't wash away the growing certainty that Eli's last request had set in motion something neither Luke nor Clara was prepared to face. The November rains transformed Clara. As the parched land drank deeply, she seemed to draw strength from the same source. Her movements grew more confident, her hands roughened but capable. She learned to read the sky for weather, to gauge the cattle's moods, to stretch supplies with an ingenuity that surprised them both. Luke watched this transformation with a mixture of admiration and unease. The fragile town woman was disappearing, replaced by someone who could kill a chicken for supper without flinching, who could stitch a gash in a horse's flank while murmuring soothing words. She wore Eli's old work shirts now, sleeves rolled up, her dark hair bound in a practical braid. "Mama looks different," Sarah observed one morning, watching Clara haul water from the newly filled well. "She's learning," Luke replied, but privately he thought it was more than that. Clara wasn't just adapting to ranch life. She was claiming it, making it hers in ways that unsettled him. The cabin itself bore her touch now. Wildflowers in a cracked mason jar on the table, curtains sewn from flour sacks at the windows, the children's drawings tacked to the walls, bringing color to the weathered wood. Even the meals had improved. She'd discovered wild herbs in the meadow and traded eggs with a passing peddler for spices. "You've got a gift," Luke admitted one evening, savoring a stew that tasted nothing like his usual bland fare. Clara's smile was brief but genuine. "My mother always said seasoning could make shoe leather palatable, though I hope your beef isn't quite that tough." It was the first time she'd made a joke, and the children laughed, really laughed. The sound filled the cabin like sunshine, and Luke found himself chuckling too, rusty as an unused gate. December brought the first snow, light flurries that delighted the children but worried Luke. Winter meant harder work, scarcer game, longer nights. It meant being truly trapped together. No escape to town or range when the walls closed in. He was checking the barn's roof for weak spots when it happened. Clara had climbed the ladder to bring him coffee. She'd taken to anticipating his needs in ways that felt dangerously domestic. A board, rotted from autumn rains, gave way beneath her feet. Luke moved without thinking, catching her as she fell. For a moment, they were pressed together, his arms around her waist, her hands gripping his shoulders. He could feel her heartbeat racing against his chest, smell the lavender soap she still hoarded from town. "I've got you," he said, voice rougher than intended. She looked up at him, and something passed between them, electric as summer lightning, undeniable as thunder. Her lips parted slightly, and he found himself leaning closer, drawn by a force stronger than propriety. Then Benjamin called from below, "Mama?" And the spell broke. Luke set her on her feet, stepping back so quickly he nearly fell off the ladder himself. "Thank you," Clara whispered, not meeting his eyes. "Boards need replacing," he muttered. "Should have checked them sooner." They avoided each other the rest of the day, but the cabin felt smaller than ever. Every accidental brush of hands at dinner, every shared glance over the children's heads, carried weight. Luke escaped to the barn early, but sleep wouldn't come. Near midnight, he heard footsteps in the snow. Clara appeared in the barn doorway, wrapped in a shawl, carrying a lantern that painted her in gold and shadow. "I couldn't sleep," she said unnecessarily. Luke sat up in his bedroll. "Something wrong with the children?" "No." She moved closer, setting the lantern on a barrel. I wanted to apologize for today, for making things difficult. Nothing to apologize for, isn't there?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "We both know what's happening here." The words hung between them, finally given form. Luke stood slowly, aware of every inch between them. "Clara, I dream about him," she interrupted. "Eli, every night, but lately—" She paused, gathering courage. "Lately, when I wake, It's your face I see first, your coffee on the stove, your shirt that needs mending, and I feel so guilty I could die from it. He's been gone 3 months, Luke said carefully. Guilt's natural. Doesn't it? She looked at him directly then, eyes bright with unshed tears. Tell me you don't feel it too, this pull between us. Tell me I'm imagining it, and I'll never mention it again. Luke's hands clenched at his sides. Every honorable bone in his body screamed at him to lie, to send her back to the cabin, to rebuild the walls between them. But looking at her, brave, beautiful, trembling in the lantern light, he couldn't form the words. I feel it, he admitted, the confession torn from somewhere deep. God help me, I do, but feeling and acting. Clara crossed the space between them in 2 swift steps. I know the difference, she said fiercely. I'm not asking for, I just needed to know I wasn't alone in this, that I'm not a terrible person for, you're not terrible. Luke's voice was rough. You're human. We both are. She reached up, fingertips barely grazing his jaw. Sometimes I forget that. Sometimes I feel like I'm just surviving, just existing for them. She gestured toward the cabin. But then you look at me like you're looking now, and I remember I'm still alive. Is that wrong? Luke caught her hand, meaning to push it away. Instead, he found himself holding it, studying the calluses that had replaced town-soft skin. Eli is dead. The words came out harsher than she intended. I'm sorry, but he is, and we're here, trying to build something from the ashes. The children need stability. They need... She paused. They need what we could be, if we weren't so afraid. Fear keeps people alive out here. So does hope. She squeezed his hand. So does connection. So does... Luke silenced her with a kiss. It was meant to be brief, a momentary weakness to end the conversation. But Clara's response undid him. She kissed back with a desperation that matched his own. Months of grief and loneliness and unspoken want pouring out between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back. Luke stepped away, running a hand through his hair. We can't. The children. I know. Clara's voice was steadier than his. But we can't pretend forever either. She left without another word, taking the lantern and leaving him in darkness. Luke sank onto his bedroll, head in his hands. What had he done? What line had they crossed? The next days passed in careful avoidance. They spoke only of necessities, chores, weather, the children's needs. But the kiss lived between them, unacknowledged but unforgotten. Clara threw herself into preparing for Christmas, teaching the children to make paper decorations from old catalogs, baking with their meager supplies. Luke found reasons to stay out longer, checking fence lines that didn't need checking, hunting when they had meat enough, but he couldn't avoid the evening meal, couldn't miss how Clara's eyes would catch his across the table before darting away. Thomas noticed first, with a child's instinct for adult troubles. Are you angry with Mama? He asked Luke one afternoon as they mucked stalls. No, Luke said carefully. Why would you think that? You don't talk to her like before. And she looks sad when you leave. Luke had no answer for that, so he redirected the boy to the task at hand. But Thomas's words haunted him. The children had lost enough. They didn't deserve to lose the fragile stability they'd found here. That night, he forced himself to join the family after dinner instead of fleeing to the barn. Clara looked surprised, but pleased when he accepted Benjamin's demand for a story. He told them about tracking bears, about the time he'd been caught in a blizzard and had to shelter with his horse for warmth. The children listened wide-eyed, and Clara smiled, the first real smile in days, when the little ones were abed. Luke and Clara sat by the fire in their customary spots. The silence stretched, but it felt different, less charged, more like a held breath. I've been thinking, Clara said finally, about what's best for all of us. Luke tensed. And we can't go backward, can't pretend that night in the barn didn't happen. But we can choose how we go forward. She looked at him directly. The children need parents, real parents, not two people dancing around each other like guilty strangers. What are you saying? I'm saying we have a choice. We can honor Eli's memory by giving his children the stable home he wanted for them. Or we can let fear and guilt tear apart what we're building. She stood, moving to the window where snow was beginning to fall. I've made my choice. I choose to live, to be present for them, and to stop pretending I don't care for you. Luke joined her at the window, standing close but not touching. Outside, the world was turning white and clean, covering the rough edges in pristine snow. Caring and acting on it, there's still a difference, he said quietly. I know. Clara's reflection met his in the glass. I'm not asking you to love me, Luke. I'm asking you to consider that maybe, in time, we could build something good here. Something Eli would have wanted for his children. Luke thought of his brother, laughing. Impulsive Eli, who grabbed life with both hands. Would he want them frozen in grief and guilt, or would he want his family to find happiness, even if it came in unexpected forms? Time, Luke said finally. We take time. See what grows. Clara nodded, a small smile touching her lips. Time, she agreed, as if in response. Benjamin called out in his sleep, and Clara moved to check on him. Luke watched her go. This woman who'd invaded his solitary life and transformed it into something unrecognizable, but undeniably warmer. Time. It was what the land needed after drought. What wounds needed to heal. What seeds needed to grow into something strong enough to weather the storms ahead. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in temporary peace. But beneath that pristine surface, Luke could feel the stirring of something inevitable, like spring waiting beneath winter's grip, patient but certain. The blizzard struck without warning on a January night, transforming the world into a howling white void. Luke had seen the signs, the restless cattle, the heavy sky, but hadn't expected such violence. Wind shrieked through gaps in the cabin walls, rattling the windows Clara had so carefully curtained. Uncle Luke! Thomas's voice carried from the main room. The roof's making scary noises. Luke emerged from the barn where he'd been securing the animals. Ice crystals stung his face as he fought his way to the cabin. Inside, he found chaos, Sarah crying in the corner, Benjamin clinging to his mother, and Clara trying to stuff rags into gaps where snow was blowing through. A tremendous crack split the air. The roof beam, weakened by age and the weight of snow, sagged dangerously. Get the children to the root cellar, Luke commanded, grabbing his tools. Now. But Clara was already moving, gathering blankets and the last of the firewood. Thomas, carry the lantern. Sarah, hold Benjamin's hand. They descended into the earthen cellar where vegetables and preserves were stored. It was cramped, cold, but solid. Luke reinforced the door against the wind, then turned to find the family huddled together, their faces pale in the lantern light. It's just a storm, he said, trying to sound confident. We've weathered worse. Have we? Clara's question wasn't challenging, just weary. She pulled Benjamin closer, the boy whimpering against her chest. Luke built a small fire in the cellar's crude hearth, careful of ventilation. The smoke made them cough, but warmth was worth the discomfort. Hours passed. The storm's fury increased, boards creaking overhead like a ship in high seas. Tell us a story, Mama? Sarah pleaded through chattering teeth. Clara began a tale about princesses and castles, but her voice shook. Luke watched her struggle, saw the fear she was trying to hide. Without thinking, he moved closer, adding his own details to the story. Dragons became cattle rustlers. Knights became cowboys. The children giggled despite their fear. As the night wore on, the little ones dozed fitfully. Clara and Luke sat vigilant, listening to the storm's rage. The cold deepened, seeping through the earth itself. Luke noticed Clara shivering violently despite the blankets. Come here, he said quietly, opening his arms. She hesitated only a moment before moving against him, bringing Benjamin with her. Luke wrapped his coat around them both, Thomas and Sarah. Half asleep, instinctively pressed closer, and suddenly they were all connected, a knot of warmth in the cold dark. "I'm frightened," Clara whispered against his shoulder. "I know." He tightened his hold. "But we're together. That's what matters." She lifted her head, meeting his eyes in the dim light. Something passed between them. Understanding, acceptance, need. Their lips met, soft and desperate, a claiming of life in the face of nature's fury. It was different from their first kiss, deeper, more certain, tinged with the sweetness of mutual surrender. When they parted, Clara touched his face. "Luke, I know," he said again. Because he did. The wall between them had crumbled like the roof above. There was no going back now. The storm peaked near dawn, then gradually exhausted itself. When Luke finally pushed open the cellar door, weak sunlight revealed a transformed world. Snowdrifts reached the cabin's windows. The barn roof had partially collapsed, though the animals had survived. Pressed together for warmth, they emerged like survivors from a cave, blinking in the brightness. The cabin was damaged but standing. Together, they set about making it livable again. Luke and Thomas shoveling snow, Clara and Sarah salvaging what they could from the kitchen. That night, exhausted from the day's labor, they gathered around the rebuilt fire. The children were subdued, marked by their night of fear. But there was something else too, a closeness forged in crisis. "Are we a real family now?" Benjamin asked suddenly, looking between Luke and his mother. The adults exchanged glances. Clara's hand found Luke's, squeezing gently. "Yes," Luke said simply. "We are." The next weeks passed in a blur of winter work and quiet transformation. The careful distance between Luke and Clara dissolved, replaced by small intimacies, a hand on a shoulder. Shared smiles over the children's antics, conversations that stretched late into the night. One evening in February, after the children were asleep, Clara stood before him in the firelight. "I need to tell you something," she began, then stopped, color rising in her cheeks. "What is it?" I care for you, more than care. I believe I'm falling in love with you." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I know it's too soon. I know what people would say, but I can't pretend anymore. When you held us in that cellar, when you kissed me, I felt whole. For the first time since Eli died, I felt like myself again." Luke stood slowly, crossing to her. "Clara, please don't tell me it's wrong. I know it's complicated. I know—" He silenced her with a kiss, pouring all his unspoken feelings into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you too," he said roughly. "God help me. I've been fighting it for months. But that night in the storm, I realized something. Life's too short and too hard to waste on fear and guilt." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "What do we do now?" "Now?" Luke drew her close. "Now we stop fighting what's between us. We make a real home for those children. We face whatever comes together." They moved together then, drawn by needs too long denied, in the privacy of the main room, with the children safely asleep. They came together with a passion born of months of restraint. Their union was tender and fierce by turns, a claiming and a surrender, a promise made with bodies when words weren't enough. Afterward, they lay entwined before the dying fire, Clara's head on Luke's chest, his fingers tangled in her dark hair. "I should go back to the children," she murmured without moving. In a moment, he held her tighter. "Let me have this moment first. Are we terrible people?" she asked quietly. "For finding happiness in the wake of tragedy?" Luke considered this. "I think Eli would understand. He always said I was too alone out here. Maybe this was his way of fixing that." Clara laughed softly, the sound vibrating through his chest. He did like to meddle. That he did. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the wind and the settling fire. Finally, reluctantly, Clara rose and dressed. Before returning to the children, she leaned down to kiss him once more. "I love you, Luke Rollins," she whispered. "And I love you, Clara Rollins," he replied, the name feeling right on his tongue. She smiled, radiant despite the late hour and their uncertain future. "We'll make this work, somehow." "Yes," he agreed. "We will." The rest of the winter passed in a haze of secret glances and stolen moments. They were careful around the children, maintaining propriety during daylight hours. But at night, when small eyes were closed, they found each other, sometimes just to talk, to plan, to dream of spring and what it might bring. The children blossomed under this new warmth. Thomas grew more confident, taking on greater responsibilities with pride. Sarah's laughter returned, bright as birdsong. Even little Benjamin seemed more settled, less likely to wake crying for his father. One March morning, as the first hints of spring touched the air, Luke watched Clara teaching Sarah to milk the cow. The sun caught her hair, turning it to burnished copper. She laughed at something Sarah said, the sound carrying across the yard like music. This was what he had been missing, Luke realized. Not just a woman's touch or help with the work, but this, family, laughter, love. The lonely man he'd been seemed like a stranger now, a shadow cast by grief and stubbornness. Thomas appeared at his elbow. "Uncle Luke, when are you going to marry Mama?" The question, so directly asked, caught Luke off guard. "What makes you think?" "I'm not stupid," Thomas said with 7-year-old dignity. "You look at her like Pa used to, and she smiles more now. Sarah says it's because you love each other." Luke studied his nephew, seeing Eli's directness in the boy's eyes. "How would you feel about that, if your Mama and I got married?" Thomas considered this seriously. "Pa's not coming back, and Mama needs someone to take care of her. You're doing a good job." He paused. "Plus, you tell better stories than Pa did." Luke ruffled the boy's hair, throat tight with emotion. "Don't let your PA hear you say that." "I think he knows," Thomas said matter-of-factly, then ran off to help with chores. That night, Luke shared the conversation with Clara. She laughed and cried in equal measure, holding him close. "Out of the mouths of babes," she murmured. "He's right, about everything. Even the stories, especially the stories." She kissed him softly. "So, Luke Rollins, are you going to make an honest woman of me?" "Just as soon as the preacher can make it out here," he promised. They held each other close, two souls who'd found unexpected love in the aftermath of loss. Outside, the spring wind carried the promise of new growth, of life returning to the frozen earth, and in the small cabin on the edge of nowhere, a family continued to build itself from the pieces of the past and the hope of tomorrow. Spring arrived with vengeance, bringing not renewal, but revelation. Luke had ridden to town for supplies, leaving Clara to manage the ranch with Thomas's help. The trip, usually completed in a day, stretched to 2 when a wheel broke on the wagon. When he finally returned, he found Reverend Philip's buggy in the yard. Inside, Clara sat rigid at the table, her face drained of color. Across from her, the Reverend perched like a crow, accompanied by Mrs. Watson and Mrs. Campbell, the town's self-appointed moral guardians. Little Benjamin clung to his mother's skirts while Sarah and Thomas hovered near the door, eyes wide with confusion. "Mr. Rollins," the Reverend's voice dripped disapproval. "How fortuitous. We were just discussing your situation with Mrs. Rollins." "My situation?" Luke set down his parcels slowly, reading the danger in Clara's eyes. "Mrs." Watson couldn't contain herself. "Living in sin, that's what. The whole town knows. Mrs." Morrison saw lamplight moving between house and barn at unseemly hours. The Fletcher boy heard sounds when he passed by last week. "Careful." Luke's voice dropped low. "Dangerous. There are children present." "Indeed there are," Reverend Phillips interjected. "Which is why we're here. These innocents deserve better than to be raised in a house of scandal." Clara finally spoke, her voice steady despite her pallor. "We've done nothing wrong. Luke has been nothing but honorable." "Honorable?" Mrs. Campbell's laugh was sharp. "Taking your brother's widow into your home. Alone? For months. We know what happens when a man and woman share close quarters." "What happens?" Luke said coldly. "Is that a family survives. A widow keeps her children fed and sheltered. A man honors his brother's dying wish." If your intentions are honorable, the Reverend said smoothly, then surely you'll have no objection to more proper arrangements. Mrs. Hutchins in Denver, Mrs. Watson's sister, runs a respectable home for widows. She could take Mrs. Rollins and the children until more permanent situations can be found. Permanent situations? Clara's voice rose. You mean farming my children out to whoever will take them? Separating us? It would be best. Get out. Luke's words cut through the Reverend's platitudes. Get out of my home, now. Mrs. Watson gasped. The impropriety. You see, this proves what it proves. Luke stepped forward, and the women shrank back. Is that I won't tolerate anyone threatening my family. These children have lost enough. They won't lose their mother, too. Your family? The Reverend stood, gathering his dignity. Before God and law, these are not your family. Mr. Rollins. And if you persist in this inappropriate arrangement, we'll have no choice but to involve the authorities. The territorial judge takes a dim view of moral corruption, especially where children are concerned. They swept out in a rustle of righteous indignation, leaving silence in their wake. Sarah began to cry. Thomas's fists were clenched, his young face twisted with anger. Benjamin just looked confused. Mama? Sarah's voice was small. Are they going to take us away? Clara pulled her daughter close, but her eyes found Luke's over the child's head. The fear there matched his own. No, sweetheart, no one's taking you anywhere. But after the children were abed, the adults faced the truth. They mean it, Clara said quietly. The judge, he's Mrs. Watson's cousin. They could do it. Take the children. Luke paced the small room like a caged animal. Over my dead body. That might be what it comes to. Clara's voice was bleak. Unless what? Unless I leave. Take the children somewhere they can't. No. Luke knelt before her chair, taking her hands. Running won't solve this. They'll just follow. Make the same accusations wherever you go. Then what do we do? Luke's jaw set. We get married. Tomorrow. Before they can move against us. Clara's eyes widened. Luke, we can't just... Why not? We love each other. We're already a family in every way that matters. Let's make it legal before they can use the law against us. But the scandal will exist whether we marry or not. At least as husband and wife. They can't separate us. He squeezed her hands. Clara, I know this isn't the wedding you deserve, but... Yes, the word came out fierce. Yes, I'll marry you. Tomorrow. Tonight. This minute if we could. They were married at dawn the next day. Not by Reverend Phillips, but by Judge Carter from the neighboring county, a man Luke had helped years back, who owed no allegiance to the town gossips. The ceremony was simple, witnessed only by the children and the judge's wife. Do you take this woman? Judge Carter asked. I do, Luke answered, his eyes never leaving Clara's. Do you take this man? I do. Clara's voice was clear, certain. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Their kiss was brief but heartfelt, mindful of the watching children. Sarah clapped. Thomas nodded approval. Benjamin asked if this meant Uncle Luke was Papa now. If you'd like. Luke answered carefully. The boy considered, then nodded. Papa Luke, he decided. But the marriage certificate couldn't shield them from the town's judgment. Word spread quickly, twisted in the telling. The widow who couldn't wait a decent mourning period, the brother who'd coveted his sibling's wife. Whispers followed them whenever they ventured to town for supplies. One afternoon, Clara returned from the general store with tears in her eyes and red marks on her cheek. What happened? Luke demanded, already reaching for his rifle. It's nothing. Mrs. Phillips accidentally knocked over a display. Some canned goods fell. Clara. She crumbled then. She called me terrible things, said I was raising my children in sin, that God would punish us all. She spat at me. Luke, in front of everyone. Luke's vision went red. He strode toward the door, but Clara caught his arm. No, that's what they want, to provoke you into something they can use against us. She was right, and he knew it. But the need to defend her, to punish those who'd hurt her, burned like acid in his gut. Instead, he pulled her close, feeling her tears soak his shirt. "We won't go to town anymore," he decided. "I'll handle the supply runs. You and the children stay here where it's safe. We can't hide forever. We can until they find something else to gossip about." But the damage was spreading. Thomas came home from a trip to the creek with a black eye. "The Morrison boys said Mama's a—" He couldn't repeat the word. "I hit Jeffrey. He hit back." Luke cleaned the boy's wounds, pride and sorrow warring in his chest. "Fighting doesn't solve much, son. You would have fought," Thomas said with certainty. If someone said that about Mama, Luke couldn't deny it. Sometimes protecting family means walking away from a fight. And sometimes, Thomas pressed, sometimes it means standing your ground, consequences be damned. That night, Clara came to their bed with a heaviness that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Luke held her close, feeling the weight of their choices pressing down. "I've ruined your life," she whispered in the darkness. "You were content before, alone but content. Now I'm complete," he interrupted. "Clara, look at me." She turned in his arms, moonlight revealing the tears on her cheeks. "I chose this, every bit of it. The judgment, the gossip, the complications, they're nothing compared to what you've given me. A family, love, purpose beyond just surviving. But the cost is worth paying." He kissed her gently. "I spent years hiding from life, from feeling. Eli's death brought me back to the living, through you and those children. I won't regret that, no matter what the town says." Clara traced his face with trembling fingers. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Why does it frighten you?" "Because I've lost before, because happiness feels fragile, because when you love someone this deeply, losing them would be like losing yourself." Luke understood. The fear lived in him too, that this happiness was temporary, that fate would extract payment for their joy. But he pushed it aside, choosing presence over worry. "Then we'll just have to hold on tight," he said, drawing her closer. "Weather whatever comes together." They made love then with a desperate tenderness, each touch an affirmation against the world's condemnation. In the sanctuary of their bed, society's rules fell away, leaving only two people who'd found salvation in each other's arms. But even as they clung together, Luke could feel the gathering storm. The town's judgment was more than gossip. It was a force that could tear their family apart if they weren't careful. He'd protect them all, whatever the cost. But in the darkness, with Clara's heartbeat against his chest, he wondered if love and determination would be enough against the righteous fury of a scandalized community. The morning would bring new challenges. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, Luke held his wife close and tried to believe that love could indeed conquer all, even the crushing weight of other people's moral certainty. The isolation became their sanctuary and their prison. Through the remainder of spring and into summer, Luke handled all town business while Clara and the children remained on the ranch. The arrangement worked, mostly. The children thrived in their insulated world, Thomas growing taller and more responsible, Sarah learning to read from her mother's careful instruction, Benjamin losing the last of his baby roundness. But Clara grew quieter with each passing week. Luke would catch her staring out the window, hands idle in her lap, a longing in her eyes that hurt to see. "You miss it," he said one evening as they sat on the porch. "Town, people, I miss feeling human," she admitted, being treated like a person instead of a pariah. She attempted a smile. "But I have you, the children. That's enough." It wasn't enough, and they both knew it. Clara had been raised in society, educated for conversation and community. The ranch's isolation, once a temporary shelter, had become a cage. July brought unexpected hope. Luke's nearest neighbor, Jacob Muller, arrived with his wife Greta, German immigrants who cared little for town gossip. "We hear you have married," Greta said in her accented English, smiling warmly at Clara. "Is good. A man needs a wife. Children need mother. What else matters?" Clara nearly wept at the simple acceptance. The women became fast friends. meeting weekly despite the distance between ranches. Greta's pragmatic attitude was balm to Clara's wounded spirit. "These town women," Greta said one day, kneading bread in Clara's kitchen. "They have too much time for talking. On ranch, we work, no time for judging others." It was through Greta that Clara learned about the harvest dance in the neighboring county, far enough from their local town that their scandal might not have traveled. "We could go," Clara said to Luke that night, hope brightening her voice. "Just once, to dance, to be around people who don't know." Luke saw the yearning in her eyes and couldn't refuse. "If it would make you happy." The night of the dance, Clara transformed. She wore her best dress, the blue one she'd been married in, and pinned her hair in elaborate coils. Luke hardly recognized the elegant woman who emerged from their bedroom. "You're staring," she said, blushing. "Can't help it. You're beautiful." The dance was held in a barn 30 miles distant. They left the children with Greta and Jacob, promising to return by morning. As they entered the lantern-lit space full of music and laughter, Clara gripped Luke's hand tightly. "No one knows us here," she whispered. "Then let's dance, Mrs. Rollins." They danced every song, waltzes, reels, country dances that left them breathless. Clara laughed freely for the first time in months, her face glowing with joy. Luke couldn't take his eyes off her, this vivacious woman who'd been dimmed by judgment and isolation. During a break for refreshments, a young couple approached them. "I don't believe we've met," the man said pleasantly. "I'm David Harper. This is my wife Anne. Are you new to the area?" "Just visiting," Luke replied carefully. "I'm Luke Rollins. My wife, Clara." "Rollins?" Anne's face lit up. "Not Eli Rollins' brother? We heard about his passing. Such a tragedy. How are his widow and children faring?" The question was innocently meant, but Luke felt Clara tense beside him. Before he could form a response, Clara spoke. "I was Eli's widow," she said clearly. "Luke and I married this spring. The children are well." Understanding dawned on the Harpers' faces, but instead of the condemnation they'd grown to expect. Anne reached out to squeeze Clara's hand. "How wonderful that the children have a father again, and that you both found happiness after such sorrow." The simple kindness undid Clara. Tears gathered in her eyes as she murmured thanks. The Harpers, sensing emotion, tactfully excused themselves, but their acceptance had already worked its magic. "See?" Luke murmured in Clara's ear as the music resumed. Not everyone judges harshly. They danced until near dawn, reluctant to end this glimpse of normal life. On the ride home, Clara dozed against Luke's shoulder, peaceful in a way she hadn't been for months. But peace was shattered the next week when Benjamin fell ill. The fever came fast and harsh, turning the sturdy 3-year-old into a limp, burning bundle. Clara didn't leave his side, bathing him with cool cloths, spooning water between his cracked lips. "We need the doctor," she said on the second day. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Luke knew she was right, but Dr. Henley was firmly in Mrs. Watson's camp. Still, for Benjamin. "I'll go." The ride to town had never seemed longer. Luke found the doctor at his office, explaining the situation tersely. "The boy needs help." Dr. Henley, a thin man with perpetually pursed lips, gathered his bag with obvious reluctance. "I suppose even sinners' children deserve care," he muttered. Luke's fists clenched, but he held his tongue. Benjamin needed this man. The ride back was tense with silence. At the ranch, the doctor examined Benjamin with professional efficiency, prescribing medicines and treatment, but as he prepared to leave, he couldn't resist sermonizing. "Perhaps this is God's judgment," he said, not quite meeting Clara's horrified gaze. "For the unholy union," Luke had him against the wall before the words were fully out, forearm across the doctor's throat. "You'll watch your tongue in my house." "Luke!" Clara's sharp voice cut through his rage. "Benjamin needs those medicines. Please." Slowly, Luke released the doctor, who straightened his coat with shaking hands. "The boy will recover," Henley said stiffly. "The fever should break within days. Good day." He fled, leaving the medicines behind. Luke stood rigid, fury still coursing through him. "You shouldn't have," Clara began. "He had no right." Luke's voice was raw. "No right to bring God into this, to suggest Benjamin's suffering is some sort of punishment." Clara crossed to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I know, but we need allies, not more enemies." She was right, but Luke couldn't shake his rage, that anyone would use a child's illness to score moral points. Benjamin's fever broke that night, much to their relief. As the boy slept peacefully for the first time in days, Luke and Clara sat vigil, hands clasped across the small bed. "I've been thinking," Clara said softly, "about leaving." Luke's heart stopped. "Leaving? Not you, never you, but this place, Colorado, maybe farther west, where no one knows our history, where we could just be the Rollins family, without the weight of the past." Luke considered this. The ranch was his life's work, built from nothing with his own hands, but what good was land if his family couldn't thrive on it? Where would we go? Oregon, maybe, or California, somewhere with good land and short memories. It's a hard journey. Expensive. "I know." Clara's voice was steady. "But staying is hard too. Every day. Waiting for the next crisis, the next judgment, keeping the children isolated to protect them. That's no life. Luke." He squeezed her hand, feeling the calluses that matched his own now. His delicate town wife had become a frontier woman, strong and capable. Now she was asking him to become something new too. A man willing to leave everything behind for his family's happiness. "Let me think on it," he said finally. "Come winter, if things haven't improved." "Come winter," she agreed. They sealed the promise with a kiss, gentle and affirming. Outside, summer lightning flickered on the horizon, illuminating the land Luke had thought would be his legacy. But looking at Clara, at Benjamin's peaceful face, at the room where Thomas and Sarah slept safely, he understood that legacy meant more than land. It meant family. It meant choosing love over location, future over past. It meant being willing to uproot everything for the chance to plant something better. The lightning flashed again, and in its brief illumination, Luke saw not the ranch he'd built but the journey ahead, uncertain, difficult, but traveled together. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. September came with golden light and the promise of change. Luke had made his decision. They would stay. Not from stubbornness, but from a growing certainty that running would solve nothing. Instead, he channeled his energy into building, creating something permanent and undeniable. The new cabin rose from the earth like a statement of intent. Twice the size of the old one, with proper rooms for each child and glass windows that caught the morning sun. Luke worked from dawn to dusk, joined by Thomas, who handled tools with increasing skill. Even Sarah helped, gathering stones for the foundation with determined efficiency. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed when the frame stood complete. "A real home." "Our home," Luke corrected, pulling her close. "Built to last." The construction drew unexpected help. Jacob Muller arrived with his sons, bringing lumber and strongbacks. Other neighbors, men who respected hard work over gossip, appeared to raise walls and set beams. By October, the house stood proud against the sky, a testament to community that existed beyond the town's narrow boundaries. They moved in on a crystalline morning, the children racing through rooms that smelled of fresh pine and possibility. Clara organized their few possessions with reverent care, transforming empty space into a home with touches of beauty, wildflowers in mason jars, quilts made from fabric scraps, drawings proudly displayed. "Papa Luke," Benjamin called from his very own room, the first he'd never had to share. "Look, I can see the mountains." Luke lifted the boy to better see through the window, feeling a father's pride at the wonder in those small eyes. Across the hall, Sarah was arranging her few dolls on a shelf Luke had built specifically for them. Thomas had already claimed the loft space, declaring himself old enough for the responsibility. That evening, they gathered for their first meal in the new home, Clara had prepared a feast from their garden's harvest, proof of their self-sufficiency. As Luke carved the venison roast, he looked around the table at his family, for that's what they were now, truly and completely. "I want to make a toast," Clara announced, raising her cup of precious coffee. "To new beginnings, to the man who built us this home with his own hands, to the family we've become. To Papa Luke," the children chorused, making him duck his head at the title that still caught him off guard. Later, after the children slept in their new rooms, Luke and Clara sat before their own hearth, larger than the old one, built to warm the expanded space. She curled against him, contentment radiating from her like heat from the flames. "No more sleeping in the barn," she murmured against his chest. "No more hiding what we are to each other." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "This house says we're staying, that we're a family. Let the town think what they will." Their first test came sooner than expected. A week after moving in, riders approached, too many to be friendly visitors. Luke recognized Reverend Phillips's buggy, accompanied by several townsmen including Mayor Henderson and banker Charles Whitman. "Stay inside," Luke told Clara, checking his rifle. "No." She stood straight, chin raised. "We face them together." The delegation dismounted with grim purpose. Reverend Phillips clutched papers that rustled in the autumn wind. "Mr. Rawlins," the Reverend began, "we come on serious business. State it then." Luke kept his voice level, though his hand rested on his rifle. Charles Whitman stepped forward. "There's the matter of Eli's debts, notes he signed, secured by future earnings that never materialized." "How much?" Luke asked bluntly. $800, with interest." The sum was staggering, more than the ranch cleared in 2 years. Luke felt Clara's hand slip into his, steadying. "And if we can't pay immediately," though he knew the answer, "then we'll need to call in assets, the children's inheritance, such as it is. Any claim misses, Rawlins might have to property or goods." "You mean you'll take everything?" Clara said flatly. Mayor Henderson spread his hands in false sympathy. "Perhaps some arrangement could be reached. If Mrs. Rawlins and the children were to relocate somewhere more appropriate, the debt might be forgiven." There it was, the true purpose, not money, but exile. "Get off my land." Luke's voice was deadly quiet. "Now see here," Reverend Phillips began. "I said get off my land." Luke raised the rifle slightly. "You'll have your money, every cent, but you'll wait for it like civilized men, not extortionists using children as leverage." The delegation retreated, but their message was clear. The town wanted Clara gone, and they'd use any means to achieve it. That night, Luke sat with the account books, calculating desperately. The cattle would bring some money at market, but not enough. The harvest might help, but winter would eat those profits. $800 might as well be $8,000. "We could sell the new house," Clara suggested quietly. "No." The refusal came swift and fierce. "I'll sell the cattle, the horses, everything else, but not this house, not our home. Luke, I'll find a way." And he did. Though it cost him pride, he took work at the mine, laboring underground while Clara and Thomas managed the ranch. The days were brutal. Ranch work at dawn, mine work till dusk, collapsing exhausted each night. But slowly, painfully, the debt diminished. Clara matched his sacrifice with her own. She took in washing from the miners, her elegant hands reddening in lye soap. She sold eggs, vegetables, anything spare. The children helped, Thomas hunting rabbits to sell, Sarah gathering herbs Clara dried for medicine. Through it all, their love deepened. Not the desperate passion of early days, but something steadier, forged in shared struggle and mutual sacrifice. They were partners now, in the truest sense. One November night, after a particularly brutal day, Luke returned to find the house glowing with lamplight and the smell of fresh bread. Clara met him at the door, taking his coal-stained coat without comment. "Sit," she commanded gently. "Dinner's ready." He washed mechanically, every muscle screaming. At the table, the children chattered about their day. Sarah's successfully snared rabbit, Thomas's repaired fence, Benjamin's newly loose tooth, normal family chaos that seemed miraculous after the underground silence. "I have news," Clara announced once the children were abed. She produced a leather pouch, heavy with coins. "Mrs. Muller commissioned a quilt, and the timber crew bought all our preserves for winter." Luke counted the money. Throat tight. Combined with his wages, they were close, so close. 2 more months, he said roughly. Maybe less. "You'll kill yourself first." Clara touched the new lines etched around his eyes. "Luke, you can't keep this pace." I will." She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and love and admiration into the contact. When they parted, tears marked her cheeks. "I hate that you're suffering for my past, for Eli's debts. Our past, our debts." He wiped her tears gently. "That's what marriage means. Clara, your burdens are mine." They made love that night with aching tenderness, each touch a promise. In the darkness afterward, Clara whispered her deepest fear. What if we pay it all and they still come for us? What if the money was never really the point? Luke pulled her closer, feeling the truth of her words. But he had no answer except action, no response except to keep fighting. "Then we'll face that when it comes, together." Winter arrived early, blanketing the world in white. The mine work became more dangerous, ice making every surface treacherous. But Luke persisted, driven by determination that bordered on obsession. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In December, a letter arrived from Denver, a law firm representing Eli's former business partner, Samuel Morrison. The man had died, leaving a bequest to Clara Rollins and her children, in memory of Eli, $500. Clara wept at the windfall, clutching the bank draft like salvation. Combined with their savings, it was enough, more than enough. On a brilliant January morning, Luke rode to town with Clara beside him. They entered the bank together, heads high despite the stares and whispers. Charles Whitman accepted the payment with visible disappointment. "The debt is settled," he acknowledged grudgingly. "In full," Luke confirmed. "And I'll want papers saying so." They left the bank free of financial burden, but knowing the real debt, to society's expectations, remained unpaid. Still, as they drove home to their children, their beautiful house stark against the snow, Luke felt something lift from his shoulders. "It's done," Clara breathed. "We're free." "Free of them," Luke agreed, "but never of each other." She leaned into him, and he caught her lips in a kiss that tasted of triumph and promise. They were staying, they were thriving, and no amount of judgment could change what they'd built together. The house came into view, smoke rising cheerfully from the chimney, children's faces pressed to windows in welcome. Home, family, everything worth fighting for. Won through sacrifice and stubbornness and love too strong to break. They were the Rollins family, and they were home to stay. The trial came in March, when the last snow still clung to the mountain peaks. Luke had been summoned to town on false pretenses, a telegram about cattle prices that proved fictitious. He realized the trap too late, finding the courthouse packed with townspeople drawn by the promise of scandal. Judge Watson, yes, the cousin Mrs. Watson had threatened to invoke, presided with barely concealed satisfaction. The charges were vague but damning: moral turpitude, creating an environment harmful to children's welfare, conduct unbecoming. "This is a custody hearing," Luke realized aloud, fury rising. "You're trying to take the children." Prosecutor James Thornton, imported from Denver for the occasion, smiled thinly. "We're simply ensuring these innocent souls are raised in appropriate circumstances, Mr. Rollins." Luke had no lawyer, no preparation. But as the prosecutor began painting their family as a den of sin, help arrived from an unexpected quarter. The courtroom doors opened to admit William Hartley, Esquire, a silver-haired attorney from Denver who commanded immediate respect. "Your Honor, Hartley announced. "I represent Mr. and Mrs. Luke Rollins in this matter." "On whose authority?" Judge Watson sputtered. "On the authority of concerned citizens who believe justice should be blind to gossip." Hartley's eyes swept the packed courtroom. "Shall we proceed?" The trial that followed was unlike anything the town had seen. Thornton presented his case with theatrical flair, the unseemly haste of the marriage, the isolation of the children, the corrupting influence of a union born from tragedy. But Hartley dismantled each point with a surgical precision. He called witnesses. Jacob and Greta Muller testifying to the family's stability, minors describing Clara's kindness and hard work, even young Thomas taking the stand with remarkable composure. "Do you feel safe with your mother and Uncle Luke?" Hartley asked gently. "Papa Luke," Thomas corrected firmly. "He's Papa Luke now. And yes, sir, he built us a house with his own hands. He teaches me ranching. He tells us stories. He loves Mama and makes her smile again." "And your mother? Is she different now?" Thomas considered carefully. "She's stronger, happier. She laughs like she used to when Pa was alive." His young voice carried clearly. "Papa Luke brought us back to life." The courtroom stirred at the boy's simple eloquence. But the decisive moment came when Clara herself took the stand. She wore her best dress, hair pinned severely, every inch a lady despite the work-worn hands she didn't try to hide. "Mrs. Rollins," Thornton began with false sympathy. "Surely you understand the irregularity of your situation? Marrying your husband's brother so soon after—" "My husband died," Clara interrupted, voice steady. "My children faced starvation or separation. Luke Rollins saved us. He honored his brother's dying wish when he could have turned away. But the propriety—" "Propriety?" Clara's voice rose. "Where was propriety when the bank tried to seize everything? Where was Christian charity when my baby burned with fever and your client suggested it was God's punishment?" She turned to address the packed courtroom directly. "Yes, I fell in love with my brother-in-law. Yes, we married quickly. But look at the result. 3 children with a home, an education, and parents who loved them. If that's scandal, then I embrace it gladly." The courtroom erupted. Judge Watson hammered for order, but the damage was done. Clara had spoken not to the law, but to the human hearts hidden beneath small-town judgment. The surprise witness, however, was Marcus Brandt, Eli's friend from the mining camps, travel-stained and grim. "I was with Eli Rollins 2 days before he died," Brandt testified. "He spoke of his brother often, said Luke was the best man he knew, just too stubborn to see it. His exact words were, 'If anything happens to me, I hope Luke watches over my family. He'd do right by them.'" "Hearsay," Thornton protested. "Truth," Brandt countered. "I've ridden 3 days to speak it." Judge Watson's deliberation was brief, but clearly troubled. The packed courtroom held its breath as he returned. "While this court finds certain irregularities in the formation of this household," he began, causing Luke's heart to sink, "we cannot ignore the evidence of our own eyes. These children appear healthy, educated, and well cared for. Multiple witnesses attest to the stability of the home." He paused, seeming to age before them. "More importantly, this court will not be party to separating a family based solely on the timing of a legal marriage between consenting adults. Case dismissed." The gavel fell like thunder. Some in the crowd applauded. Others muttered darkly. But Luke heard none of it. He was too busy catching Clara as she sagged in relief, holding her as she wept against his shoulder. But one voice cut through the chaos. "Mrs. Watson!" Shrill with fury. "This isn't over! God sees your sin even if the law is blind!" Luke turned, Clara still in his arms, and met the woman's hateful gaze steadily. "Then let God judge us. Ma'am, you've had your turn." They left the courthouse together, Luke, Clara, and the children who'd waited anxiously outside. Thomas and Sarah ran to them, Benjamin toddling behind. As a family, they walked through the parting crowd. Some faces hostile, others thoughtful, a few openly supportive. At their wagon, a small cluster had gathered, the Muellers, The Harpers from the distant dance. A few miners Clara had helped. Even Widow Martinez, who rarely left her home. "We wanted you to know." Ann Harper spoke for the group. "Not everyone in the county shares the town's views. You have friends, if you'll have us." Clara wept anew, but these were healing tears. Luke shook hands, accepting support he'd never thought to need or find. The ride home was quiet, each processing the day's events. As their house came into view, solid, welcoming, theirs, Benjamin broke the silence. "Does this mean they can't take us away?" "No one's taking anyone away," Luke promised. "We're a family, legal and proper now, according to the judge himself." That evening, as spring twilight painted the sky purple and gold, they gathered on the porch Luke had built specifically for such moments. The children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the sage-scented breeze. Clara leaned against Luke's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "The fight, the trial, all of it," Luke considered, watching Thomas show Benjamin how to whistle through grass blades. "I regret the pain you've endured, the judgment, the cruelty." He turned to meet her eyes. "But regret us? Never, not for a single moment. Even though I cost you your peace, your solitary life. You gave me a life worth living," he corrected. "Before you, I was just existing, breathing, working, but not living. You and these children, you're my reason for everything now." Clara kissed him then, sweet and lingering, tasting of promises kept and battles won. When they parted, she smiled, that radiant expression that still made his heart race. "Then we go forward," she said simply. "Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Luke agreed. As stars began to pierce the darkening sky, Luke reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. Eli's death had seemed like an ending, but it had become a beginning, from tragedy. They'd built something stronger than scandal, deeper than propriety, a love that could weather any storm. The children came running as Clara called them for supper, and soon the house filled with the cheerful chaos of family life. Through the kitchen window, lamplight spilled golden across the yard, a beacon of warmth in the vast darkness. This was what Eli had wanted. Luke realized, not just care for his children, but this life, love, family. His brother, always wiser than Luke gave him credit for, had known what might grow from such seeds. As Luke followed his family inside, he paused to look back at the land, his land, their land. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would always be those who condemned their choices, their love, their life. But tonight, they were home. They were together. They were family. And that, Luke knew with bone-deep certainty, was worth any price they'd had to pay. The door closed behind him, shutting out the past and sealing in the warmth of a future built on love's strongest foundation, not propriety or timing or society's approval, but the simple, revolutionary act of choosing each other, again and again, until choice became devotion and devotion became forever. In the Rollins house, laughter mingled with lamplight, and love conquered all. Thank you so much for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I'd love to know where in the world you're hearing this story. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, loss, and redemption from the American frontier. Your thoughts and reactions mean everything. Let me know what touched your heart in Clara and Luke's journey.